This year we've gotten more 4K capable or 4K adjacent capture cards on the market than we've ever had before, which is great for those of you wanting to stream 4K content from your PC or high refresh rate or high resolution stuff from your PC, or those of you with PlayStation 4 Pros, Xbox One X's, and whatever the next gen console comes out. You have capture card options to support all the different frame rate and resolution combinations as well as HDR if desired. But it can be a little confusing to figure out exactly which one you need. That's what this video is for. In this video, I'm going to explain which one of the available 4K capture cards available on the market in terms of the gaming-oriented ones you might actually want to pick and why. And we're mainly going to focus on AVerMedia in this video since they have the most options to offer, but I will mention Elgato and Magewell as well.
It's time for a 4K capture card feature showdown.
So currently you have about 5 options when it comes to picking a capture card for 4K 60 FPS capture or HDR capture or high resolution, high refresh rate capture. You have from AVerMedia, you have the LiveGamer 4K, the LiveGamer Extreme 2, the LiveGamer Ultra, and the LiveGamer Portable 2 Plus. And then from Elgato, you have the Elgato 4K 60 Pro. And then if you're willing to fork out a really high amount of money, you have the Magewell USB Capture HDMI Plus, and then the Magewell HDMI Capture Plus loop through the fancy $800 PCIe option. Now, if you want the best possible quality card in terms of build quality, functionality quality, and support, that would be the $800 Magewell card, because it can support 1440p, 144 Hz, everything up to 4K 60, and it can support HDR, although capturing HDR is kind of complicated from it. The Magewell's USB option can pass through 4K 60, but you're really only going to capture 1080p 60 from it, and because of that, unless you have specific needs of potential RGB support, although again, not at 4K, or just the better driver on Magewell's end, for example, if you're actually using it on Linux instead of Windows, the Magewell USB option just isn't worth the money, which leaves us with the gaming options. So you have 2 USB options and 2 PCIe options. USB is, of course, the external ones that you plug into a USB 3.0 port on your computer and capture externally. The PCIe ones go in a desktop tower computer. You slot it in a PCIe slot, and you will need 4 lanes of PCIe space, which might be an issue for some people. Actually, I was mistaken. You have 3 USB options. Let's start with those. For actual 4K capture, the only USB option at the moment, I know more are coming soon, but as of right now, the only 4K USB capture option is the LiveGamer Ultra. This is the weird looking rectangular USB card I reviewed. I'll have links to all of my reviews in the description below. This one connects via USB 3.0 and can pass through 4K 60, it can pass through HDR, and it can capture SDR at 4K 30 or capture HDR or SDR at 1080p 60 from your 4K 60 source. So this is a great option if you want to pass through any combination of frame rate resolution that most people would have at this point. So 4K 60 HDR, 4K 60, high refresh rate 1440p and 1080p, all of those can be passed through it, and then it mainly captures 1080p 60 or 4K 30 from it. It can do some of the high refresh rate capture, but mostly at 1080p. If that's what you're looking at, the Ultra is probably the option for you to go with, as it's the most flexible in that regard for the external options. But then you have 2 4K pass-through options, which are the LiveGamer Extreme 2, which can pass through 4K 60, but can only capture 1080p 60 at all, and its high refresh rate support is not really there. It can pass through 4K 60, and you can capture up to 1080p 60. If you are doing HDR, it will actually pass through the HDR signal since it has just a raw direct pass-through circuit, but capture will be disabled. You won't be able to capture anything at all. If you're more on the budget end or want to capture without a computer, the LiveGamer Portable 2 Plus can pass through 4K 60, cannot pass through HDR, and can capture 1080p 60. However, it captures to a micro SD card if you're in portable mode, or it still uses a very compressed encoder when hooked up to the computer, and the file quality, the video quality from that is not all that great compared to the other options. So unless you just specifically need the PC-less mode and can't afford something like the Atomos Ninja V or Ninja Inferno, I'd avoid that one just due to quality concerns. The quality out of the LiveGamer Extreme 2 is really good, however. You can get virtually uncompressed access at 1080p quality from your 4K source. Now, if you want to fully capture 4K 60 FPS content, or full refresh rate, like full 144 FPS or 120 FPS from 1440p or 1080p, you can do that with the LiveGamer 4K. This is a desktop card. It fits in the PCIe slot of a desktop, and it has a nice little RGB badge, and it can pass through and capture 4K 60. It can capture HDR. It can capture SDR from HDR pass-through, so if you only want to play in HDR but capture SDR, it does tone mapping to fix that. It supports ultra-wides. It supports high refresh rates, high resolution, whatever. It can capture 1080p up to 240 FPS and 1440p up to 144 FPS, and with the latest updates, it can actually capture all 144 frames per second. And in many of the modes, it can capture in full RGB mode, which is a much higher quality color space, just requires a lot more processing power to capture, and is harder to support on capture cards. Now, if you have no interest in actually capturing all 144 or 240 or whatever frames from your high refresh rate stuff, or don't have any interest in HDR at all, the Elgato 4K 60 Pro is certainly an option. They have better capture software. They have capture software that loops in with NDI, so you can capture like your gameplay that you're streaming without overlays or anything like that, just raw gameplay, and then send your feed over to OBS to stream. That's really cool. But otherwise, it's missing a lot of the other features of the AVerMedia cards. I do hear that they might have an HDR option in the works, but I've yet to see that come to light, and they don't have a USB option at this time. I did forget to mention this little guy that I actually just got in the studio recently from Pengo. It is a 4K HDMI grabber. It can pass through full 4K 60, 444, so full color space. It can pass it through real time and then captures 1080p 60 or lower in YU-Y2. Very similar to the LiveGamer Extreme 2 in that it doesn't actually capture 4K in any capacity, simply passes it through and captures 1080p 60, but in a kind of more professional package. It has a couple more professional features to it, I guess. I haven't fully finished my review of it. I will have that coming soon, but I did want to mention it as an option. There are actually two more expensive professional 4K options that I have reviewed and I know someone's going to ask about, but I don't necessarily recommend if you're doing game streaming. There's a couple. There's the Epiphan AVIO 4K, which is a USB 3.0 capture video grabber, which can grab up to 4K 60 FPS signals, but can only actually capture 4K 30. I actually use this as my essentially cam link for my camera right here, right now. But again, it can only capture 4K 30 or down to 1080p 60, and it doesn't have built-in pass-through, so you will need a splitter in place prior to using. There's also the Datapath VisionSC-DP2, which has two DisplayPort inputs and can actually capture 4K 60 via DisplayPort from both of those inputs. But there's no easy or cheap or at all affordable or reasonable way to split or clone DisplayPort signals from a single card, and it doesn't have pass-through. So that becomes problematic on that end, on top of the fact that that card is $3,000. Another slightly more affordable option they have is the new smaller one that I reviewed from the Datapath Vision series, which has a 1080p 60 input and a 4K 30 input, but again, no pass-through, and it's a little pricey and not appropriate for most game streamers, but it's still an option that's on the table. Now, in terms of choosing based on your computer spec, a laptop is not going to be able to capture 4K in most cases very well at all. The LiveGamer 4K and the Elgato 4K 60 Pro pretty much require you to have a GTX 1060 or higher graphics card, because in order to capture the high refresh rate or high resolution or HDR stuff, you really need the NVIDIA 10 series cards or newer for that graphics card hardware encoding, because that's the only way most people are going to be able to actually capture this stuff. Now, if you're using the USB cards, you have a lot more flexibility because you're only usually capturing 1080p 60, which is a little easier to deal with. So if you don't have Like if you have a 9 series card or something like that, as long as you have a decent graphics card for your OBS scene compositing and rendering or encoding, you're good to go. This market's always changing. More stuff could be coming out soon. I don't entirely know just yet. But this is hopefully a breakdown of which card you should choose depending on your goals. If you just need to pass through 4K and you don't need to capture it, you've got the LiveGamer Portable 2, if you don't have a computer to capture to at all, or you have the LiveGamer Extreme 2 or the LiveGamer Ultra. Those are great options for passing through. The Ultra is the only one that supports HDR at any stage. It can pass through HDR and capture SDR, and it can capture HDR at 1080p 60. If you need full 4K 60 capture or HDR capture, LiveGamer 4K. If you don't need HDR but still need full fat 4K support, Elgato 4K 60 Pro. Or if you need Linux support in any real capacity, you might have to pay the Magewell tax. Hope you found this video helpful, enjoyable, and so on. I have always had a blast using capture cards, and this year has been an exciting year of a lot of innovation and some weird decisions being made overall. Share with your friends, hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe for more tech education. Links to all of my reviews of these capture cards will be in the description below, and I will see you next time.